If you're looking at the birth of cinema and the beginnings of film history, you want to start with this young man right here named Eadward Muybridge. Eadward Muybridge was born in London, and he came to America when he was about 25 years old in search for adventure. He moved to California, which at the time was sort of like the Wild West. Well, it wasn't sort of like it was the Wild West. Though the area he went to was doing pretty well for itself, and he joined a bookshop as a sort of a publisher slash bookseller. He became very successful after working there for quite a while, and sort of was well known in the area for his books and his skills. He decided that he was going to get some new books for the shop by traveling back to London, finding some sort of antique books that he knew were not available anywhere else. And on his way back to London, he actually missed the boat. So he decided, well, I'm gonna go the long way. I'm gonna cross the country, take a carriage and then a train, and I'll get to New York and then go to London that way. And on his way, he was involved in a runaway stagecoach accident, which is apparently something that could actually happen back then, and he was severely injured. He flew out of the stagecoach, hit his head on a rock, and he suffered from double vision and loss of taste and smell, and it took him quite a while to recover. And while he was recovering, he developed an interest in photography. He was no longer satisfied with the book-selling life, but was really fascinated with motion and the way things looked, and capturing images, cameras, and all of the things associated with photography. And so he took up that trade, and he became known for his landscape photographs, which were very popular, very trendy back then. People would have spent a lot of money on purchasing landscape photography. And Muybridge made a name for himself because his landscape photography was different from others due to the sort of dramatic scenes that he would capture. And the reason he was able to do this was because he really wasn't afraid to put himself out on a limb, or in this case, as we see in this picture, sort of like out on a cliff. I mean, that's him, and he set up his camera and captured this. And when people saw something like this, it really caught their attention. It was not something you would normally see in landscape photography. And he had a habit of doing this. He wanted always to capture the perfect shot. He would clear a forest just so he could get, the perfect shot of one tree. So none of the trees were in his way to get that one that he wanted. Not very environmentally friendly, but there you go. But anyway, he made a name for himself and for his dramatic landscape photography. Now, this man, Leland Stanford, heard about Eadward Muybridge and his photography, and he hired him to solve a particular question that he had been debating. And this was apparently a widely debated question back in those days. I guess, without iPads, this is sort of what they did. So the question was, does a horse ever have all four of its hoofs off of the ground while it's running? This was a, very contentious topic. Nobody knew the answer. The human eye was unable to discern for sure, with certainty, whether all of the hoofs were ever off the ground. Now, Leland Stanford was not just some random guy. He was a railroad tycoon. He was responsible for the connection of the east to the west, so that railway connecting the entire country. He was sort of responsible for that. He was very wealthy. He owned his own track and stables and horses, and the legend is that it was a debate, and that he put like $25,000 or some enormous amount of money on this question of solving, do all of the hoofs come off of the ground? And so he needed to find out. because his reputation was on the line to some degree. So he hired Eadward Muybridge. Knew he was a great photographer. He said, "Hey, can you help me figure this out?" And Eadward Muybridge said no initially, because he knew that the cameras weren't fast enough to get that to pinpoint that moment where the horse might have all of its legs off the ground. So they tried it. He said, "We'll try it." And they got a blurry picture, and they sort of were like, "Well, yeah, it's good enough," and neither one of them was satisfied. So here's what they did. This is really what led to the first motion picture, which is now called The Horse in Motion. And here's how it worked. Muybridge decided that in order to capture the motion effectively, he would need to set up multiple cameras on the track. And each camera would have a tripwire that would go from the camera to across the track. And as the horse was running, it would trip each wire, which would set the camera off to take a picture. And so all of these cameras right in a row would go, click, 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 click down the row as the horse was running, and they would end up with multiple pictures of that horse, which could then be put together to examine the motion and to determine whether or not the hoofs were always on the ground or not. And this is the result. So you can tell that yes, indeed, all of the hoofs do come off the ground. Hooray! Stanford wins his bet, I guess. I don't really know what he said, but whatever. They solved the problem. All the hoofs are off the ground, and this is the result. Now this is literally just putting pictures together. It's just combining several pictures and putting them together, just like a flip book. But this was the first time that people really realized that this ability was available, that you could create motion using images, and in particular using photography. That if you just had a fast enough camera, and if that technology was developed, you could begin to see the way that things moved. So there you go. Just a quick note, the version on top here is the one that Eadward Muybridge had at that time, and the one below is a composite of pictures that he still took, but that was animated in 2006 by someone who just put those together. So just two different looks at sort of the same idea here by Eadward Muybridge, The Horse in Motion. Thank you.